This is the Energizing India podcast.
India has 326 million registered vehicles on the road in 2024. 75% of these are two-wheelers, scooters, and motorcycles, down from 80% just 4 years ago. Some 12% of these are trucks and buses. In fact, overwhelmingly trucks, as only 2% of registered vehicles in India are buses. The fastest way to clean the air in the cities of India is to convert public transportation, intra-city and intercity buses to electric. The government has been doing a great job at this in the last 4 years, with over 5,000 buses a year being converted in cities in India to electric. The early start was from Chinese buses that came to India. But over the last 4 years, we've seen Indian entrepreneurs who have invested boldly to implement new technology made in India for electrification and clean mobility in Indian cities. Today, we talk to one such company, an Indian gem, EKA Mobility. We welcome to the program Sudhir Mehta, Chairman, Founder, and CEO of EKA Mobility. Sudhir, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ravin. Pleasure to be here.
Sudhir, you're an MBA from the University of Chicago in International Business and Finance. You are also the MD of Pinnacle Industries. You are the founder chairman of EKA Mobility. You were the founder MD of Man-Force Trucks in India. You're the president of the Maratha Chamber of Commerce and Industry. You were previously chairman of the CII Western India region. You led the Pune platform for the COVID response, which is now called the Pune Platform for Collaborative Response. And you're also a unique, brave leader taking on the Mathadi menace in Maharashtra. What is driving you to be this sort of bold change agent?
So, Ravin, this starts with a fundamental philosophy that our country is too important to be left only to politicians and bureaucrats. And by this, I mean no disrespect to them, but as citizens, as business leaders, we have a very important role to play. So my life is fundamentally divided into a couple of compartments. The first compartment is related to business and my companies and what we are trying to do in terms of electric mobility, as also in our other companies. The second part of that is working on public policy and other issues where we are able to have an impact as business leaders. And the third is civic advocacy. And to my mind, all of these three are very, very important facets. And fortunately, the India of today allows one to do that. We have the single most exciting opportunity in our country today, that is to create large businesses, at the same time to have social impact at a scale which we could never do earlier.
Well, Sudhir, your company was a component supplier, Pinnacle Industries. In fact, a component supplier of repute. You supply some of the largest companies that are making vehicles in India, whether it's Force or Tata, Ashok Leyland. And yet now you've invested in a business that's going to make electric buses. It's quite a journey to scale from making components to actually making a vehicle. I'm interested in why you did that and how you achieved that scale so successfully.
So the reason for this is going to be the single largest manufacturing opportunity for our country. If you see the auto industry, we are about 40 to 45% of manufacturing in India. And if you look at the electrical vehicle space, this is going to be, by all reckoning, maybe between 30 to 50% will move to electric by the end of this decade. Which means in reality, it is the single largest manufacturing shift the country has ever seen. And this is something that I realized about 10 years ago. And for me, that was one defining reason. And the second, of course, is the whole area of sustainability. Earlier, I worked in the drip irrigation space in agriculture and created the world's second largest drip irrigation company called Revolutionizing. As part of that, what I saw was the ability to have impact at scale. And our EV journey started out of that premise that this is the transition which is happening. And this allowed for once a component company like ours to look at transitioning to becoming an OEM, because everybody here is starting from primary school. Knowledge of the past is not something which is really very, very helpful as far as electric vehicles is concerned. It's an entirely new ball game. And that gave a chance for a new OEM like us to come into this market and really hope to have a play in what will become a very large opportunity.
You were the founder managing director of MAN Force Trucks in India as well. MAN is a big trucking company around the world. There was lots of learnings in that journey in India. What were the learnings that you translated into EKA Mobility?
So many learnings. One was at that point we were making diesel trucks and buses, but we localized our product. Also, what we learned the hard way was that for a country like India and for value markets, you cannot bring a European product and simply transplant that to India. You have to create a product which is appropriate for our market, appropriate for our customer needs. So one of the learnings that really we've applied in EKA was that we started with a clean slate approach and said, let's first talk to the customer, let's understand what the customer requirements are. This sounds very basic, but sometimes as OEMs, you always have a feeling that you know what the customer needs. And the important thing is most of the time you have no idea what the customer needs. And we started from that approach. We also said that we want to really look at how a product can be made in India and delivered not just in India, but delivered across the world in what we call value markets. And essentially, starting with that philosophy, we've developed now a range of electric buses, a range of electric LCVs. There we were making medium and heavy trucks, but ultimately, all of this comes down to the same basics: set up strong R&D, set up strong systems, set up strong processes, the ability to work with the ecosystem. These are all facts that were very useful in the MAN journey and now are also coming in handy as we build EKA.
So, Sudhir, I've been to your impressive facility and I've seen your engineering team and the vast amount of people and the investment that you're making in in-house engineering, which is almost different from what a lot of other companies are doing, because there's a lot of Chinese technology running around India on public transport. You're actually trying to build this from zero. Where is your tech from?
So we are actually very proud to say that our tech is our own. We are very privileged that we have as our partners the VDL Group, which is the number one electric mobility company in Europe. They have been for the last 10 years and are the leaders in electric buses in Europe. We also have Mitsui of Japan, which is our strategic partner. But we fundamentally started with doing the technology out of India. This is with a deep and abiding belief that if you spend long enough and if you put in that effort, we have the talent to be able to do it. So we started with a small team. Today we have more than 300 people in our R&D, which is comprised of some of the industry veterans as well as many, many young people. This EVs is an area where you need software as much as you need hardware, as you know. And this is where India has that unique confluence of talent. So we brought together people who had worked abroad, who had worked in India, who had no experience of electric, some experience of electric, experience of software, and started to build the team. As we went along, we have experts now from VDL also with us. We are also exchanging a lot of information, but essentially we've built what we call an India stack, which is technology for EVs, which is completely made ground up in India. And now, of course, is something we want to go global with.
So it's very heartening to see, because the first electric buses were, of course, BYD. They were really Chinese. They were on the Chinese platform, GBT. Then you had the next range of buses, which was made in India, but really with a lot of Chinese tech. And now to see the depth you're bringing, which is made in India for India, India stack. The question that comes to my mind is, it's always the white pink elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, and it's China. The scale they have is enormous. Stockholm runs on Chinese electric buses. It's, and yet Sweden has Volvo and Scania. It's almost, breathtakingly unbelievable to think that public transport is not Swedish. And the reason for that is the Chinese are 4 times cheaper, and they're 4 times cheaper because they have subsidies, they have government support, they have an ecosystem, they're well ahead of the electrification program around the world. So when you come to India, where, we are 1/10 of that scale on anything, and therefore, 3 or 4 times the cost on anything, in order to survive, do we need a fortress? The last remaining fortress is really against that kind of aggressive competitiveness from China, America, and India. And it seems like the rest of the world is relenting almost. Do we need a fortress to survive?
Yes and no. I don't think we can be a closed economy by any standard, because we are part of a global market. So we need to be open. At the same time, we need to be very clear that who are we investing in, and are we trying to create technology from India? Let me give you an example. As you're aware, the fundamental difference between an electric vehicle and, let's say, an ICE vehicle is as much the software which goes into it, which is really how you are monitoring the vehicle, how you're running the control systems. you'll be surprised to note that many of the control systems for vehicles which are still being sold in India are Chinese. And what that means is essentially the software is being controlled by somebody sitting in China. This has very frightening implications. Tomorrow, let's say there is a conflict, and essentially somebody sitting somewhere in the world can shut off your vehicles. Even worse, can start your vehicles, get them to move, and you have all of these movie kinds of awful scenarios which are possible. Now, that's not something which is at all desirable. That's something we need to ensure that we have control over. Secondly, any country needs to build a few industries which are fundamentally its own. Take the example of China. BYD gets about 2 billion in subsidies every year. They have 100,000 people in engineering. That's more than probably the engineering strength of the EV industry in India today. That's not created overnight. We are not going to be able to do it from this year to next year. But given our aspirations as a country, fundamental technologies have to be developed in India. And companies which are doing this in India, I'm not saying they need to be only Indian companies. They need to be companies which are investing in India, need that support to be able to create technology at scale, which can be not just sold in India, but around the world.
So interesting, around the world. And it's really nice to see Indian companies starting to think global. Do you think that you are at the point where an Indian electric bus would be accepted globally? Could you see an EKA bus in Mexico or in Indonesia, or any part of the world you might want to pick? I'm picking where I see Indian vehicles already running, Mexico and Indonesia, but what are your aspirations?
So, Ravin, the answer is absolutely yes. For instance, in EKA, we've identified almost 63 what we call value markets. For instance, Africa, let me give you an example. Many countries in Africa today have more than 70-80% of their power coming from solar. So that's almost the holy grail. If you can run electric vehicles on cheap solar power, then you've got unit economics which are simply unbeatable. Africa has it. But today, the Chinese are the only game in town. If you want a Chinese bus, or you want a Chinese LCV, or you want a two-wheeler, the Africa has no option but to get it from China, because European vehicles just are far too expensive. India can turn out to be a very, very important market which can service it. This is something we are planning for. We have the support of Mitsui, which, as you know, is a large Japanese conglomerate. And they have a very wide distribution network in Africa, and we are already in discussions with many of the African partners for seeing what do they need. But again, our idea is not to just simply bring an Indian product and take it to Africa. It is to really see what is the product that they need, what is the variants that they need, and to use the engineering know-how of India, the manufacturing know-how of India, at the same time look at it by sharing of technology. This is something that China doesn't do. China is not good at sharing technology. Our view is that technology should be eventually democratized. It should be available to everybody. There is no sense in having technology which is residing with you for something as important as electric vehicles. It needs to be spread over as many vehicles to be produced as possible, so the per unit cost can come down. And this is why we have a global plan to not just sell in India, but to sell across the world.
So is there, just to labor that point, is the plan to make in India and export, or is it more like the arrival model where from the UK, not quite successful yet, but you know the company to go into a location and actually, when you win a project, to assemble in that location and do some level of transfer of either technology or local employment?
It's the second. It's a distributed manufacturing model. The idea is to create the tech out of India. But, every country would like to make its own electric vehicles. And this is a aspiration which almost every country has. Again, the Chinese are typically very good at giving you CBUs, but they are not really, focused on sharing of technology.
Or customization. Yeah.
Exactly. So in our case, the idea is that these would go as what we call a bus in a box or an LCV in a box. Be locally assembled in that country. The components can come as a kit. And this is something we learned from MAN. We used to export what we called a truck in a box, where a truck would go in almost 1,200 parts, be assembled in that particular country. This is the same concept that we want to employ for our buses, our LCVs. And then increasingly, you can have local content in those countries depending on the maturity of their auto component industry, which in many cases is quite mature. So the idea eventually would be that we share the technology, but we get it to a level where we have to compete with ICE vehicles. Our competition is not other electric vehicle manufacturers. Our competition is really to get the ecosystem to move from using conventional vehicles to using electric vehicles.
Bus in a box. I like that. Talking about things coming in boxes to India, or not coming in boxes, the latest policy of the government to allow CBU imports, which was really a sop to Tesla for the passenger car vehicle market. You wrote an interesting article called "Don't Put Muska on Musk." What is your view on this liberalization endeavor to allow for more competition from direct imports?
So I think the government has had the right policy, which is to say that, listen, the policy cannot be company specific. It has to be industry specific, number one. Number two, for any company that desires to have a large play in India, there has to be a localization play. And this is what this new policy enables. Earlier, what Tesla, in my understanding, was asking was blanket kind of concessions. I don't think those work, and those are not needed. First, let's go back to looking at what is the priority for India. For a priority for a country like India has to be first public transport. It has to be electric vehicles which are used all the time. And if you see the use cases, even today, two-wheelers, which is the shift to electric, the two-wheelers which are being used for couriers, which are being used all the time. Cars, typically, if you see 95% of cars, if they are not used as taxis, are used 5% of the time. The impact on the environment, the impact on everything else is significantly less than what it is for commercial vehicles. So I don't think there is a strong business case for giving subsidies for private usage of electric vehicles. Those are bought on different considerations, and the user typically is able to pay that differential. Having said that, if a company like Tesla is looking to make in India, looking to manufacture in India, certainly we must encourage it. In fact, I've been at the forefront of saying that Tesla should come to Pune, our city, because we have a unique ecosystem here in our city, which is comprised of manufacturing, IT, academic institutions, and this is the unique masala. So our masala of our city is fantastic for a company like Tesla to come. But at the same time, this cannot be driven just by subsidies. There has to be much more than that.
So let's talk a little bit more in deep tech now. You had to make many decisions when you were designing your bus and also your LCV. What did you arrive at in terms of the ideal lithium battery chemistry for intra-city buses in India?
So, Ravin, battery technology is something changing all the time. And this is something in which we are still constrained by supply of battery cells. For buses, we did a very careful evaluation and came up with the idea that LFP is the best chemistry, because that chemistry has to take into account several considerations. It is first and foremost safety. Number two is ambient conditions in India, which tend to be extreme either way, usage patterns, all of this. So in our case, we are preferring LFP, but this is not to say we are making our technology which is agnostic really to battery technology. And that's the benefit of creating our own software, that tomorrow there is some other battery technology that comes, most welcome. We are willing to try it out, and our software is already configured that in the same vehicle you can adapt to different battery technologies in the future. I think there is no magic bullet here. These will change, and vehicles will have to be made in such a manner that they can adapt to changing battery technology.
That's quite refreshing to hear, because when you think about batteries and cells, everything is made in China, and it will be for the foreseeable future in India until the big gigafactories come on stream. They were supposed to be coming on in 2024. It looks like it'll be 2 years from today. Is security of supply chain a conversation that is happening in boardrooms of large OEMs such as yourselves?
Yes, and it needs to happen also in the boardrooms of Delhi. I think, again, this is too important an area where we can leave our supply chains exposed to global ramifications. I think what we were speaking about earlier today, even in China, has done that. China, while they are probably the most global at exports, are probably the most insular at allowing other technologies to come into their markets. So there is a dual kind of strategy which they are able to do because of the size and scale of the markets, and also because there is no other game in town, so people have to put up with it. But at the same time, in India, we have to find our own path. So while I think it's okay to do it step by step, we are not going to be able to have a completely independent supply chain. Uh, I think if you look at an electric vehicle, the three main parts of that are battery and cell technology. This is power electronics and mechanicals. India is very strong on mechanicals. We have the best of component suppliers in the world. Mechanicals, I think all of these will be localized. Power electronics actually is an area which is, to my mind, the single biggest opportunity for Indian component suppliers to come in, because they have the requisite software and hardware skills, and this is where it can be done. Battery is the tough nut to crack, and that is something which will take time, but certainly we need to make sure that we have alternate supply chains available. Fortunately, there is also now the supply demand mismatch is reducing, so battery prices are coming down, which gives us the opportunity to have a lot more leeway in this regard.
Talking about battery chemistries, have you explored? I know you've explored hydrogen because, along with Siddharth of H2 Energy, you made India's first hydrogen bus. The Prime Minister Modi inaugurated it and had a ride on it. Have you explored also sodium ion, for example?
Yes, we are looking at different technologies. We are KPIT is also a company in Pune, and Ravi is a very passionate believer in all of these changes. So we are working with KPIT on different areas. I think we will, the choice certainly should not be only to eat one thing. In India, anyway, we are used to eating different kinds of food. Sometimes you have South Indian for breakfast, you have Indian for lunch, and you have Italian for dinner. So similarly, I would say for battery technologies, we need to be open to all options for different use cases. This will be there for a country which is as big as India, and for the use cases which are as diverse, no one single bullet will work.
So let's talk about use cases. Today, you're focusing on intra-city because that's really the push. It's municipalities. And there's two questions I want to talk about. One is intra-city versus intercity. Are we going to see electrification come to the intercity bus market? Are you looking at that? We know the Veera in South India is looking at that. Where is EKA going with that? And then more importantly, after that, I want to talk about how you secure your payment, because you're facing municipalities, the most dangerous, segment of the Indian market, because of the way they structure. It's a complex methodology, and you have to have a lot of intellectual property or leverage to be able to get your money out. So, how do you manage that, being a company based in Pune but delivering to all parts of India?
So, two parts to your question. The first part about intercity and intra-city buses. So the answer is absolutely yes. Again, any use case for a commercial electric vehicle is solely dependent on the usage. And let me give you an example. Today, between Pune and Indore, you must have maybe about 200 buses that go daily, which are carrying passengers 600 kilometers. It's a fantastic use case for electric vehicles. We are looking to develop our range of coaches. Again, these will be uniquely different. The use cases in India are very different from anywhere else in the world. For instance, cargo comprises a very important percentage of the revenue, even for most intercity buses. This is nowhere else in the world. That typically 30 to 40% of the revenue of an intercity operator comes from running cargo. So having more cargo space is equally important as having passenger space. Secondly, sleepers are a very important part in India. This is not the case anywhere else in the world. So all of these are uniquely Indian situations. The use case here is actually very good because if you're running a bus over 500-600 kilometers a day, the return and the unit economics and the environmental impact, all of these is extremely, extremely positive. And we are looking at it. We are also building up with VDL the Citia bus in India. The Citia is the number one electric bus in Europe. And we have licensed that product from VDL to make in India for India and export markets. The idea is that we will have our made in India stack, but also we will have European buses which are made in India, which obviously because of the lower cost of production in India can be priced at to be a more value proposition for the customer. And this then gives us a complete portfolio of products right from city to intercity to intracity. And that's what we are doing. To answer your second question on payments, I think this started as a model where initially people were not sure about electric buses. And this is why you had the slew of these orders, which were called GCC, So GCC, for those who don't know, is simply where the government is asking the OEMs to run buses on a per kilometer basis. This was okay when it started, but it's not really a model which is sustainable for the numbers that we need to do in India. India has 1.8 million buses, and we probably need to put another 8-10 million buses for us to really make a big impact in terms of the environment. No OEM in the country or anywhere in the world can finance 8 to 10 million buses. You simply, it's like saying to somebody who provides an air conditioner that please give the air conditioner, also supply the power, also supply the finance. You need different ecosystem players to do that. And I think the government is realizing this. This is now changing in the current tenders, which is the reason why I'm very optimistic that this usage will increase. And the last is one point on payment system. In the recorded history of independent India, there is no single case of default of payment by an STU. There have been cases of delay, but public transport is typically an essential service. So to that extent, I'm not so worried actually, because payment eventually comes in from the government. The ability is more to have access to green funding at scale. And this is something that really multilateral institutions, large financial institutions will have to come into this, because this is a game where you need to have that access to be able to put in numbers.
So, let's talk about these large financial institutions, one of them being Macquarie with their latest venture, Vertello, which is asset management. Is that filling in the gap that you just described between the OEM forced to undertake the GCC model versus now a company being able to undertake this GCC model, allowing the OEM to focus on making the buses and then, delivering a service as you would around the world? Is that going to make a big change to how intra-city public transportation happens in India?
Absolutely. I think what Macquarie is doing is path-breaking, but we need 100 Macquaries. Again, let's look at this in terms of the size of the opportunity. If you're talking about, the government is talking about 800,000 buses over the 2030, that's the stated objective of the government. So to put that, you're talking about finance of 800,000 crores. Even if you break that over 5 years, that's about 150,000 crores of funding needed for putting in these number of buses. Now, something of that size and scale can only be done by large institutions. The other element of this, I think, which is not spoken about enough, is the area of generating employment. Let's not forget that the bus industry employs 8 to 10 million people around the country and can be one of the largest generators of employment for the country. And this is something we'll have to keep in mind as we electrify our fleets.
So let's delve on that a little bit, because I know you're passionate on this subject, Sudhir. You once talked about every bus employs 5 or 6 Indians, and this model could be at risk if we go down a methodology of everything being contracted to conglomerates. So where do you see this? How is this impacting the present way Indian entrepreneurs get employment?
So again, my favorite view is that business should be left to private individuals. The government's task is to enable, and this has also been the stated policy of the government. If you see in India, there are officially about 30,000 private bus operators. These are companies which are operating buses. But in addition to this, there are millions of individual owners. Now, if we're going to put in, let's say, 1 million buses in the market, that's a potential million owners of assets. Now, if we can find a way to get them involved and make them owners, so on trucks you have the typical what is called Malak Chalak route, which is where there is a person who first becomes a cleaner, then they become the main driver, then they take one vehicle on loan, and then they set up one truck, and then eventually they have a fleet. This is the great Indian economic story, and this is the same which can be enabled in buses eventually, because who's better to take care of their own asset than somebody who's the driver, who's also the owner of the asset? So you're also solving for areas like maintenance, usage. Public transport typically in India has been something which has been very badly shunned. And the idea is you don't want to replace just people who are today traveling in buses. The eventual solution is to replace people who today are traveling in cars. And electric vehicles gives you a chance to do that. For somebody who's not tried it, sit in a air-conditioned electric bus once and your life will never be the same again, because it's completely silent. It gives you great comfort. It allows you to travel at peace, whether you are on social media or whether you're sleeping or taking a nap or on the phone. it's a completely different experience. And I think if we can make this experience possible, whether it is for employee transport, whether it is for people who need to travel from point A to point B, if you can travel in safe, air-conditioned comfort, why do you want to take your car? And this is something we need to bring that change in our country.
So developed countries, not one where the poor get to drive cars, but where the rich go on public transport.
Absolutely. And we need some model use cases. I'll give you the example of our city of Pune. We are spending about 22,000 crores on our metro. And only the first phase of the metro is operational so far, but the revenue is about 1 crore a month. That's because we don't have last mile connectivity. So eventually, the successful models around the world are all multimodal transport. You need metros, you need buses, you need feeder buses, you need intercity buses, but public transport must get the attention it deserves. That's probably the single biggest impact that you can have. And I think if you're talking in terms of money, this is pittance compared to the economic impact that putting, let's say, 100,000 buses on our cities, if we can do it, it would transform the way I look at it. And this is what we define our mission actually, is our company's mission in some ways is to save 15 minutes for every Indian per day. And let me explain that calculation. The calculation is that if we can put in X number of buses, you will reduce traffic congestion. Now, saving 15 minutes for somebody every day, to my mind, is an equally important job as what a doctor can do, because it's something that you are enabling them to do something else which is productive. And that's very much possible. So public transport has an impact which is far, far greater than just saying, I'm going to provide a bus. It has an impact of saying, can I change the way the world lives?
Very interesting. Those numbers that you gave, 22,000 crores versus 12 crores a year in ROI, they're staggering. Right? I was reading once the Hong Kong Metro, MTR, in Hong Kong, which is a profitable venture, and was profitable very early in its journey. Is profitable because every station has a big building above it, and a lot of their money comes really from real estate, from rentals or sales, rather than just ticket revenue. Sudhir, in one of the articles that you wrote that I was researching online, you made a very interesting comment. You talk about how existing legacy OEMs are overbooked for electric buses for the tenders, and yet they are blocking space by being, L1 or L2 in new tenders. Do you see this as being uncompetitive? Is there a better way to do this to allow the whole ecosystem to grow?
I think so. I think we can make the system a lot simpler. What are we trying to do? You are asking the OEM to provide a bus which takes somebody from point A to point B at a particular cost. It's not rocket science. It's quite simple. And what has happened today is that you have a lot of buses which are tendered, but the deliveries are not happening. And this happened for many reasons. Some company had valuations considerations, which is normal for any new startup kind of companies. Some were in a rush to take orders at prices which were probably not viable, which they're finding out now. So, and capacity is limited. For the next 5 to 10 years, I think we need to focus on increasing capacity of electric buses which can be produced in our country. So, as I always say, our competition is not each other. Our competition is to develop the Indian ecosystem. So we'll have to do some things differently. Maybe we have to aggregate some things at the back end to create capacities, because no single OEM in the country has anywhere close to the capacity needed to service India and then eventually a world market. I think our total addressable market for buses is something like 8 to 10 million eventually per year, which can go out of India. And today, last month, we made collectively as an industry 250 electric buses. So something has to change. And I think this can only happen, again, through collaboration and through working the government, industry, all stakeholders to really come together to create an Indian EV ecosystem. This has to be an ecosystem play. It can't be a company play.
How many OEMs are there today in the market that make electric buses?
So there is 5 to 6 OEMs which are making electric buses. Okay, again, some of them vary. Some products are coming primarily from China. Some are made in India. Some are a hybrid of the two. But as I said, we need a lot more capacity. None of us, I think, would be able to cater individually to the demand of the market. And more importantly, we missed out on a lot of opportunities as a manufacturing industry. And this is the one where this is a sunrise industry. As India, it's extremely important that we look at global market share of electric buses. In India must be number 2 in terms of market share of electric buses. China is today 97 to 98% of all electric buses produced in the world come from China. That number needs to come down. We first need to get into single digits to double digits, and then really to look at the high teens, etc., in terms of market share. If we start with that approach, then you're going to see emergence of many new OEMs. You will see the traditional OEMs, which of course bring great strength, but you're also going to see the emergence of new OEMs that together create this ecosystem for the country.
So Sudhir, you are also making an LCV, an electric LCV. It looks quite sexy. What is the thought process there? Are you also going to make larger trucks? Are you just focusing on the last mile market, such as the Amazon delivery space? Where are you going with that product?
So our first attempt again was to make vehicles which are used for profit. And if you look at the use cases, today the use cases is best for LCVs. Yes, last month we passed a very, very important milestone in our country where more than 50% of three-wheelers sold in India are now electric. This is astonishing from almost nothing 3 to 4 years ago. So just goes to show that the Indian customer understands the TCO concept very well. And when the TCO becomes positive, the switch happens like a tsunami, as happened in the case of CNG vehicles a few years ago. Similarly, our belief is that LCVs will be the next market to move. There is market for last mile, but then there is also very important niche markets. For instance, we are working in the area of garbage disposal. Our first vehicles are already running in municipal corporations which are collecting garbage. And lo and behold, the running cost of these vehicles is 1/10 the cost of the conventional diesel vehicles. But most importantly, the government also finds that you don't have the theft of diesel which you earlier would have. So from a unit economics point of view, these are vehicles which have a very, very important impact on the environment of the city. It improves it. At the same time, the running costs come down. So there are several such use cases, and our idea is, rather than trying to spray the market, we focus on use cases where the vehicles make economic sense for the customer.
So let's talk about the name. It's a very interesting name, EKA Mobility. It can mean a number of things. It can mean oneness, togetherness. But I also was reading in the 1930s, the tangas outside railway stations were also called EKAs in certain parts of India. So how did you arrive on the name, and what's the message you're giving your market?
So EKA actually means Ekatra, coming together. And when we thought of this name, the genesis of this was that, again, our thinking comes from being a component company, that we need to bring together all stakeholders. This is not our journey. We are not going to be able to be successful doing it ourselves. We need all partners. We need charging partners. We need finance partners. We need service distribution partners. We need ecosystem partners. We have more than 200 component suppliers who are now giving us systems, subsystems. So for India, we need to create this EV ecosystem, and the company was started with that idea, and we really deeply believe in that.
So wrapping up the show then, one last question, and it's a question we ask all the talent that comes on our show. I have to apologize for the very frivolous nature of this question, but it always brings a pointed answer. And the question is this: if you had the opportunity to be the Prime Minister of India for one day, just one day, and could make any decision you wanted to foster faster adoption of clean mobility in India, what would that decision be?
Very interesting question. What I would do is really, again, as I said, public transport. To me, this is the one area, if we can bring public transport to be clean, sustainable, you will change and bring smiles to so many millions of faces. And I would do that. I would say this is really to look at public transport in a holistic manner. And as you said, to ensure that people who travel in cars are not forced, but they feel that they would like to move by public transport. Then we have succeeded.
So there, it's quite refreshing to hear a business leader talk about saving 15 minutes in the lives of people every day rather than just make a bus and make money out of it. Very insightful conversation. Clearly, EKA is in very good hands and you're going to be very successful. Thank you for making the time to be here today, and we look forward to having you on the show again.
Thank you, Ramin.